So the actual defense mechanisms, now we'll go into them little by little. So repression. Repression is basically, kind of hiding a feeling. I've written just three words explaining each one because I don't want to give you too much text. I would rather just, give you the basic what it means and then give you a little bit of, further information verbally. So repression is a hidden feeling, a hiding a feeling. So you basically suppress, or you push back a certain feeling in your mind to deal with it later, and you don't really let it come to the forefront. You kind of, you're aware of it, you know that it's there in the background, but you kind of keep you keep kind of pushing it back. So this is repression as a defense mechanism. Regression is falling back into an early stage. So for example, like when I talk about defense mechanisms being partly conscious, partly unconscious, like repression could be conscious. Repression could be a defense mechanism that you use consciously, where you avoid a certain thought or you avoid a certain feeling. Regression is more unconscious. It can be more uncontrollable. So for example, falling back into an early state means behaving in a manner which is not appropriate for your age, and you regress back into a earlier developmental stage because of some distressing news or distressing behavior at home by your parents, for example. So in the case of, let's say, a teenage child, or a child of 12, 13 years suddenly wetting the bed, uh, going back into the, according to Freud, going back into the toilet training anal stage. And clearly the child is approaching teens, so he's actually approaching the phallic stage. So regression would basically mean this child has, for some reason, mentally gone back into the anal stage. Um, some children, after years of not sucking their thumb, they suddenly start sucking their thumb again. So things like that. In terms of adults, regression is not so overtly visible. It's not so overtly easy to spot. But if you've ever come across hysteric patients, patients with hysteria or paranoid personality disorder, or um, paranoia or a paranoid schizoid personality, you will see that their behavior is kind of, it can switch very easily between very mature, very thoughtful behavior to suddenly very immature, very unpredictable behavior, like almost like a teenager. And this kind of switching between mature and immature behavior is actually, could be regression, could be the defense mechanism of regression coming into place. So you could see that a lot, especially in very severe psychopathology, like I said, like hysteria, neurosis, schizophrenia, even personality disorders. You can see this falling back into this very immature state of being very easily, but it's not so easy to spot. Projection, we've talked a lot about this. A lot of psychoanalysis is based on projection. It's assigning a feeling onto others. So a part of you that is unacceptable for you, or you sometimes just feel that something about this person irritates me and I don't know what it is. And that person is very well liked by everybody else, but for some reason this person irritates me a lot. Essentially what you're doing is that you're projecting a part of yourself that you don't like onto that person, or that person's behavior um, reminds you of something that is lacking in your own behavior. And that essentially is, you're projecting your insecurity, your inadequacy onto that person. It's not that person who's reminding you consciously that, okay, look, I can do this, but you can't. It's that your incapacity to do it, as well as that person, irritates you because you're projecting your own insecurity onto that person, your own low self-esteem onto that person. So this is projection. A classic example which we use time and again is, being obsessed with somebody, saying that this person is harassing me, wants to talk to me all the time, has some sort of obsession with me, but to the outside world that's not visible, that person is obsessed with this other person. And that essentially is projection. You're projecting your infatuation or your crush or your love, intense love for somebody, onto that person when that person does not reciprocate it. So your mind is trying to distort the reality. um, Reaction formation is acting the opposite way to an urge. So for example, very simple example would be that, you have an urge to, let's say, consume alcohol. You're a recovering alcoholic and you have an addiction to alcohol, and you're very much craving a drink and you're very much craving alcohol at the moment. But the opposite thing, is to go and exercise. So you go and exercise double of what you normally would. Or like, for example, consuming a salad when all you really want is a pizza, but you're not supposed to because you're on a diet. These are more easy examples, but in case of relationships, what happens is that it gets very confusing because, especially in the case of, let's say, extramarital affairs, we see a lot of partners say that, I know my wife is or my husband is having an affair, but they are very sweet to me when we are together. That is essentially reaction formation on the guilty partner's part, because what the guilty partner is doing is they're actually having an urge to be with their lover, but because they can't act on that urge consistently or continuously, the opposite reaction is to shower your spouse with love and attention. And this confuses a lot of couples because they are aware that their partner is having an affair, and complain about it in therapy, but they don't understand why their partner is showering them with all this love and attention. So what's going on, and this is the point in the affair where a lot of couples actually come approach therapy, because they don't understand what's going on. So it's this very strong defense mechanism, and it's especially visible in such an example of couples going through couples therapy for affairs or things like that. Sublimation, finding a socially acceptable way to express. I cannot think of a better example. I was thinking of an example to give you all for sublimation, and I could not think of a better example than a violent video game. The obsession that we have with games today, especially I've been reading a lot about PUBG and all these games about, going into these alternate worlds and playing out aggressive realities like killing people and all. The reason why these games have become so popular is because, essentially, like Freud said, we all have a very strong aggression drive, which cannot be acted out in public. And So far, society had found ways to repress it. First defense mechanism, we were healthily repressing it. But with the technology going as far as it is, and with the possibility of creating such advanced games and alternate realities, sublimation is something that has come to the forefront, because you have socially acceptable ways to express desire that you would not be able to express in day-to-day life. So another way is social media. So if you have somebody who's extremely fond of or wanted to be a model and she cannot be, and then you see this person constantly posting photographs of herself, and this sort of narcissistic behavior, which we have an epidemic of, by the way, because of social media. This is sublimation. So you're finding a socially acceptable way to express yourself in ways where you would not be questioned, where your psyche would not question you, your conscious would not question you. Denial, probably the most common and most basic defense mechanism and very visible, refusal to accept reality. Denial can be conscious as well as unconscious. So in the case of pathological liars, for example, who are used to lying, it can be very conscious. They know that they have done something, but they can lie about it to the absolute end, and you would not get the truth from them. And that's the level of denial that they can be in. But on the other hand, for example, somebody who has lost a loved one and is still pretending that that person is alive, that is an unconscious denial. That is a denial that is not completely in your control. It is being created by the mind to protect the person from the distressing news that their loved one has died. And so that kind of denial is mostly not in that person's control, and they almost appear, a little bit out of control when they talk like, that person is still around and he's still alive, when actually we all know that he's dead. And that sort of denial is actually something that needs therapy, could need therapy if it doesn't solve itself. So it can be conscious and unconscious. Displacement, shifting of the sexual or aggressive impulses. So, for example, the best example of this is actually the one which was given for sublimation. This picture of a man doing a punching bag is actually a better example for displacement than for sublimation. So essentially what he's doing is he has this aggressive impulse. He wants to go around beating people up. He's a very aggressive person, but that is not something that can be practiced in daily life. So he gets a boxing bag at home, and he does boxing every day. He's acting out his aggressive impulse. Like I said again, displacement can also be uh, it can also be wrong in that way that sublimation means you find a socially acceptable way to express a desire, but displacement can also be a socially unacceptable way. It's just that impulse shifts from one thing to another thing. Like, for example, violence against women could be a classic example of displacement of a sexual or aggressive impulse, because the man actually has a sexual or aggressive impulse against his mother, for example, but he cannot act on that. His id is extremely angry with the mother, but because his superego will not allow him, that this could get displaced and come out on, let's say, his wife. And you could see more domestic violence in a household where displacement. So displacement need not always. This is the main difference between sublimation and displacement, is that sublimation is socially acceptable. Displacement can be acceptable and non-acceptable. So this kind of it can be both, but it is displaced to another object. Sublimation need not be something that comes out on an object. It can just be that you mellow down those feelings to a point where it becomes more acceptable to you. But displacement actively means that you displace your feelings from one object to another object. It can be a material object or it can be a living object, but your feeling shifts from one object to another object. Dissociation is similar to denial. It's a temporary separation, but in denial, it's like you are not accepting that this reality actually exists. Whereas in dissociation, there is a complete separation from the situation. Like the ideal example would be that you are in the middle of a family feud. Let's say there's a family fight going on, and you go around telling everybody in your family that you are very much in the center of it. You caused it, but you tell everybody that I'm not involved in this. And how often we all do that. So it's kind of convincing yourself that you're separated from the situation, you have nothing to do with the situation, and it's not your fault. Again, we see this very often in family therapy, in couples therapy. So, for example, again, in extramarital affairs, husband and wife fighting, husband is having an affair, the wife will, play down her role and say, I had nothing to do with this marriage breaking. But we all know that's the reason, that one of the reasons why affairs start is because the marriage was bad to begin with. So, but this is dissociation. You're separating yourself from a situation where you can't accept the reality. Intellectualization, concentrating on intellectual components. So, this is similar to rationalization, actually. Rationalization is more like giving logical explanations to yourself and to others for your actions. Intellectualization is actually going into research and going onto Google and finding things and explaining things in very intellectual ways, finding scientific studies to back up your claims. This is kind of, intellectualization. The way it's different is that intellectualization focuses more on intelligence. So it's more on you're using intelligence as a tool to in the defense mechanism. Whereas in rationalization, it's more like you're trying to have a logical reasoning about a particular situation, but they're both similar. And the classic example of this is, again, like when I see people struggling with eating disorders. They go on a binge, eating weekend, and they've been good whole week, they've dieted very well. Then suddenly on the weekend they'll go and binge, and then on a Monday when they have a therapy session, and they'll be like, okay, I binged. And then you say why. They'll come up with all these scientific reasons why, it's good for you, you need a break and things like that. So you're kind of rationalizing it, intellectualizing it to yourself, because you feel very guilty. Part of you feels very guilty. So this is the defense mechanism, intellectualization. Altruism is basically um, I have read a very good example of altruism in the recent days. If you are all aware of Salman Khan, celebrity, I'm not a very big fan of Hindi movies, so I don't really watch. But I've been reading a lot of Times of India, and I was reading about altruism today in the morning, and this example came to me about his company called Being Human, where he devotes a lot of his money to charity. And it came to me as a very classic example of somebody who's very, very guilty, and somebody who's not being able to accept what he's done in his life. I mean, he's run over people with his car. He's been involved in a lot of legal cases where he knows he's at fault. And altruism is basically finding the light at the end of the dark tunnel. It is basically trying to put a band-aid on that guilt by giving service to society, service to charity, service to your charity, lots of charity organizations. And this is actually a healthy defense mechanism. So when we see altruistic behavior in therapy, um, we would not say to that person that this is wrong. So we would encourage it because it is a healthy defense mechanism. It's something that shows that the person is finding the right means to cope up with their guilt or the problematic part of their personality. Similarly, with intellectualization and rationalization, also, they are healthy defense mechanisms. So the unhealthy ones are, like, for example, displacement, denial, these regression. But these intellectualization and altruism are the healthy defense mechanisms. Humor, I don't need to explain. But the main thing is that it takes away unpleasantness. We all know somebody who tends to be funny, even in the most darkest of situations. And that's actually basically a way to take away the difficulty in the situation. And humor, again, is a healthy defense mechanism, provided it is kept in check. So if somebody becomes humorous to the point that they start offending people with their humor, then it's a problem. Suppression, similar to repression, that's why they sound also the same: suppression, repression. In repression, it's more about camouflaging that thought or trying to push that thought behind other thoughts. Like, for example, okay, I'll deal with let me deal with this first, and this first, and this first. I don't have time to deal with this, or let me just push it behind. Suppression is more like a delay in attending. You get a phone call, you know you need to attend to that particular news that you have received, but you delay it and say, no, I have many other things in my life. I can't handle this right now. For example, a family member who needs your help, and you've helped them and you can't help them anymore, but you're guilty because you feel that, no, I should be helping them. So you could delay in attending to that. And that is essentially you're suppressing that urge in you to help for whatever reason. So these are the defense mechanisms.